Excellent. So, a little different, kind of like it, so keeping us on our toes. So we'll see what, I guess, I was gonna say next week, but I guess it's tomorrow actually, we'll be back here again. So with that, we should probably get started. So we at least have a break between now and tomorrow. With that, so I will, again, just welcome everyone that is here. Guys, this is our second workshop, kind of go over the budget, discuss those things. We appreciate all those that came last week, and I appreciate Raylene and her continued work and efforts to move us forward with this. And just so everybody knows that Raylene is doing so much extra. Matt Oram left, did an amazing job, and so she's been kind of handling this all. And Rochelle's been a great help as well, and Michelle and some of the others, but really a big load of what Matt would be doing at Restaurant Raylene. So she has been giving tireless amount of hours and work to this, and so really just want to make sure that I don't know how much we appreciate that. And just take it easy on her because she's going through so much. But really appreciate what she's doing. So with that, we will go ahead and have Debbie call us to order. We'll go from there.
Counselor Doty,
Here.
Counselor Stodic,
Here.
Counselor Register,
Here.
Counselor Williams,
Here.
Counselor Allgood,
Here.
Counselor Dittenberg.
Here. Good, thank you so much. Yes, all council members are. So again, just want to welcome everyone that's here, public, and for our staff to be here in that regards. And we look forward to continue going through this process and see where we're at, and what we can do to continue providing the great service to the citizens of Caldwell. So with that, Raylene, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, City Council and Mayor. So I apologize for this small font of this, but hopefully it'll be posted on the internet and I can send out and the Excel version, I'll make it be able to zoom in. But this, these first 4 pages are essentially our budgets by each fund and the remaining tax balance. So I'm going to kind of go through each fund and kind of talk about it. A little bit of an overview. Obviously, you'll hear from all the departments on their budget requests and some high, but this is more high level. How I look to balance budget, how I look to spend fund balance or not to spend fund balance, and really where we're going into prepare us for not only fiscal year 26, but fiscal year 27 and beyond. So that's kind of what this looks at and what we're doing in the short term and long term. So for general fund, so for people at home, just to kind of talk through the column. So I start out with how we ended fiscal year 24. And this is cash or fund balance. I'll kind of go back and forth, but it is cash. And so I start with fiscal year 24 cash balances. And then I add in the budgeted fiscal year 25 revenues. And then if there was any budget amendment for additional revenues that were calculated that we've already processed, I added those in as well. And then the budgeted fiscal year 25 original budget, and then the budget amendment that we already passed for fiscal year 25. Then with working with some departments, there is projected unspent funds, meaning that either those projects are not getting done this year and they're getting carried over into next year's budget because there just wasn't enough time to do an RFP or just the timing of how the projects are lined up. It just is not going to happen this fiscal year. And so that's what those unspent funds are. And then I get an ending fiscal year 25 balance. And then for fiscal year 26, the proposed revenues and personnel and maintenance and operations. So this does not include capital. And then that total, and then any one-time capital requests, which will give us, if you look at line 14, that is the ending cash balance for fiscal year 26. And then line 15, if we have a reserve set in policy, that is the reserve. Hopefully. So for general fund, the projected cash balance is 21,000 at the end of, or 21 million, sorry, at the end of fiscal year 26, which leaves a cash reserve estimated at 14 million. So we have, at the end of 2026, our estimate would be that we would have just over 7 million. That is for operations that's not set aside for reserve. Some of that is going to be allocated in specific buckets. I haven't dug that far into this. This is just looking at a total fund overview. As we progress later in the general fund, as I talk about it, I have a more detailed spreadsheet of the different departments and their separate budgets and revenues for general fund. So, because that is so large. So on this first page, sorry. On this first page, I just want to highlight a couple of funds. The first being the street fund. As you can see, there is a projected unspent funds. As I talked previously, streets we knew was going to be over budget. And so that was a budget issue. As you can see, we are not going to spend 3 million of the proposed budget that we have this fiscal year. And so unspent budget means that cash is not spent as well. So there is also $10 million in capital projects. Rob tomorrow will kind of go into detail about his budget. And so I'm not going to go into each department's detail. I just want to highlight some certain funds. As we talked about the cemetery capital fund, which is Fund 21, you'll see the ending cash balance is negative 416,000. This is due to the mausoleum that Debbie talked about. And so there's two options there that we are working through. It's either going to be an internal loan from the cemetery perpetual fund or with revising fees to allocate additional fees to that fund as well. It is probably going to be both, not just one solution. As you can see with CEC and economic development, both of those fund balances at each fiscal year get zeroed out because we support those two funds with a general fund transfer. And so I estimate what that general fund transfer is going to be, but it's based off of actual expenditures. And so those fund balances do get zeroed out at the end of each year. Before I move away from the general fund or special revenue funds, does anybody have any questions about any of these funds?
Thank you. Now, just to be clear, when speaking about streets, you said it was over budget. Can you explain for everybody listening what you mean by that?
So over budget means that they haven't spent over their budget, meaning they are over budgeted. They have, based off of their current budget and the amended budget, there was some duplication of projects that were budgeted. And so it shows that streets has too much budget appropriated to it that because of double projects that are budgeted. So, and that was a calculation on my error. So,
And I'm not trying to point that out. I just want to be clear on this confusion or misinformation, really. We have not spent over budget in any fund, have we?
that is correct. No budget is over. We don't have any. I would recommend to the public to always look at our quarterly treasurer report that we publish online. It shows our budget to actuals, and none of our budgets are over. We're within budget on every single budget.
Thank you so much.
I had a question of it. On line 15, the projected cash reserve and general fund, almost 15 million. Is that where we need to be?
Yes, so that is based off of the 30% calculation. So as general fund expenditures go up, that amount that increases every year. So last year was about 13.5 million. And so this year you can see it's gone up based off of the estimated expenditures in general fund.
So it's keeping pace.
Yes,
Chair, then I have a question. You talked about the 30%. That 30% is a policy decision set by this council to have 30% in reserve or to save 30% of some number that creates that amount?
In our financial policy, it states that we will set aside 30% of current general fund expenditures in a reserve to not spend it down. So we can always budget for these amounts. We could spend all of it. But if we spent all of that 30%, we would not, there's no way to make that money back up. So it is intentionally holding on to those funds when there is an emergency, which can happen at any time, meaning, a significant flooding or significant nature thing that does happen within the city that where we need to activate protocols or we need to pay for additional police or fire because City Hall went down or there was a building that caught on fire that devastated the community. So it's there for emergencies and city council can allocate it for sure if they want to use it for specific projects. But it is set aside each year for that 30% so that we do not spend it. We always recommend a reserve because if for example, there was another recession similar to 2007, we would hit our levy rate cap. And if we hit our levy rate cap, that would mean that we would see a significant reduction in property tax. We would not be able to levy any, like once we hit that cap, we would not be able to levy it, which means that this amount would help us balance our budget.
So another question. So is 30% adequate? Meaning if adjusted for whatever's happened between 2007 and 2008 now, 30% may have been adequate for a mid-year market correction. Is 30% adequate now if there is a mid-year market correction in our capital?
So with the analysis I've done, usually it's you want it like 6 months of general fund expenses. So I would say that we have that with that 30%. And because we adjust it every year with the increase in general fund expenses, then we are intentionally setting aside more every year.
Thank you.
Question for you. So I understand line 14, 15, line 14, the 21.8 million roughly, after we take out the expenditures, you're projecting that we're going to wind up with roughly 15 million for a cash balance. Is that correct?
So the 21 million, that is after both revenue and expenditure for fiscal year 26. So that's the ending balance after and that would be if all revenues came in exactly as I projected and all expenditures came in exactly as I projected.
So we actually have 56 roughly million available between the cash reserve and the cash balance.
I would say when I pull this on a monthly basis on the cash, we have about 30 million. However, this is the time period that we see that cash balance it dips down because our next bigger property tax doesn't happen until July and August. So we do see that cash flow go up and down on it, but when I pull that report, it's usually around 30 million that we do have on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Going to page 2. Page 2 is all of our capital and impact fee funds. And so with this, I just wanted to bring a couple of things to attention here. As you can see with the fire bond, that balance we expect as we start the project and we start working on it, we're going to expect that cash balance to keep on decreasing. Every year when we levy the property tax money, that only goes to make the bond payment. That is not for the construction. So we do expect that cash balance as that project starts to decrease and to use that all up by the end of the project. So the other fund I wanted to bring attention to are the capital funds of the Fund 50, 51, and 57. So these are all the Fund 50. That is our capital fund that pretty much any general fund or special revenue fund department can access and just make a request out of. So most of the time, what you'll see is CEC, parks, cemetery, that are making requests out of there. There is significant, and it's not just, vehicles, there's park equipment. That's where we paid for the Memorial Movie Park out, new equipment this year. So this is where if impact fees can't pay for it, this is where, those items are budgeted. For police and fire, capital, those are also where, police and fire capital are budgeted. The only downside to police and fire capital is that they only have one revenue source within those, and that is the sanitation franchise fee. It's about $150,000 to $170,000 a year. So, once those monies are gone, the only way to recoup them is either a transfer from general fund or allocating additional, revenues to those funds. So, the impact fee funds, those are pretty steady. We've still seen an increase in the revenues that are coming in, even though, we are spending out of them. I will say that our, police and fire, we are currently in the process of updating the CIP. And so once that is finalized, we'll see that change. But those revenues are still pretty steady. And, for parks, we're still working off the current CIP, and there are still items that are being budgeted out of those funds. The new fund that we started this last year was the street impact fund. This is where the traffic impact fees are. It does take a little bit to get those fees in, but the money that we, are estimating to come in this year, which is about $1 million, we already have a project for that we budgeted for fiscal year 26. So, any questions on the capital funds?
I have a question. So we have this Fund 50, this capital list, and you talk about it coming, or it being for playground equipment or whatever. Will we see a list that goes with this? So you're pretty sure that 2,058,000 is the entire list that you've been presented this year?
So no, the amount that is budgeted for the capital fund is just over 850,000, which I have that list for you. The intention is, you know, if we were to spend all of those funds all in 1 year, I would say that's not wise. Plus, we are working with, once I get to the list, one of the things on there is the Memorial Tennis Parks to redo those. So this year is just the design. But next year, which would be about 1.3 million, is the build out of that. But that's not shown here in the budget. And so there are plans to use that fund balance. It's just not all this year. Any other questions on capital fund? The next page is enterprise funds. And so with enterprise funds, as you know, these are all revenues based off of user fees, and other than the BID, which is a special assessment. And so the concern with enterprise funds is, especially with water, wastewater, electrical and irrigation, is the infrastructure, making sure that we are collecting enough to pay for current maintenance and paying for future infrastructure. And with golf, the goal is to really make sure that we get a reserve and we're able to pay for repair and maintenance of their facilities. A lot of that cost is going to be in the irrigation costs as those are aging. And so, as you can see, all of them do have a positive fund balance at the end. However, the fund that I want to talk about is water. As you know, on the financials that I produced monthly, I sent to you guys, water is always a concern. You're going to hear tomorrow from Public Works about fees, but water is something that we are going to have to look within the next year to to be able to forward some of the projects that are coming up and and it's not even just expansion of the system, it's just the maintenance of the system. There's gonna be some significant increases in those fees to cover those. Because we can no longer cancel projects and wait it out. These are projects that have to be done. And so, I know that Rob will have more for you tomorrow on that, but as you can see, the projected fiscal year 26 balance is less than the reserve that we have in our financial policy. And so as that fund balance gets used, it definitely becomes more and more of a concern to me. So, in addition, like, you know, with all of the other funds, they are self-supporting. And so it is one of those things that it's not just revenue fees enough to cover current expenditures. It's really starting to think, are we bringing in enough fees to cover future expenditures, future expansion, and future maintenance that is currently being deferred or even not known. So that's one of those things that in the next few years to really figure out what type of deferred maintenance we do have and start budgeting for that and start planning for that. Any questions on the enterprise funds?
Based on our conversation we had at the council meeting on Monday, that's one of the biggest concerns I have is that are Rob and Peter to pay Paul with these new subdivisions, how we're gonna keep up with all the maintenance and the bodies and the services that we have to have. I know there's not any clear cut formula for that, but I just think we're getting further and further behind, it seems to me, based on the last 8 years I've been doing.
I can only defer to Rob on like the master plans on where the status of the deferred maintenance is and how, if we're behind or not. Because I'm not an expert in those plans, so. The next page, page 4, is our internal service fund. We don't talk about these a lot, but these are the health trust, the HRA Viva retirement plan, our short-term and long-term disability, and our flex fund. These are all funds that are really managed by finance and HR as we manage the health trust and look at our city benefits. With the health trust, financially, we are still meeting reserve. However, we've seen a significant increase in cost. We are working through the analysis of our stop loss, and the last quote we got was an increase of 17%. Now, that's not what's budgeted on our health insurance benefits on the employer side, but those costs are going up, and it is something that we are looking at trying to figure out how to look at cost cutting measures or different plan structures so it doesn't we don't have to raise the employee side significantly to cover those, because the employer side, the city side, we can only raise so much within the budget to cover before it becomes too much on the city side. So there's only so much budget to go around on the city side. So that's one of those things that we look at. We have meetings every month to discuss. And so if you ever have any questions or would like to see the quarterly report that we file with the Department of Insurance, I'd be happy to send that to you. But there is a lot of oversight within the health trust plan. And we are very diligent at looking at all costs to see how we can mitigate those. So the HRA Viva with the retirement, that one, every 2 years we have an actuary that comes in and says, do we have enough funds or do we not have enough funds? And based off of this last report, it did show that we are still, we're on track with what the $500 per employee every year that we fund is right where we need to be. If that does change, we'll bring it during budget, but that is something that we actively look at because it is a benefit that we offer to to anybody that retires from the city. For the other insurance, this is our short-term, long-term disability. I believe we're looking at an RFP. Yes, an RFP to see if we can get better pricing on this, a little bit more affordable. But this is directly paid either by the city or by the employee. And then those costs go directly paid out each month through payroll. And then the flex is funded by the employee. These are employee deposits if they opt into it. So we just track those. Any questions on the internal services?
Line 14 and 15 on the health plan,
Yes.
based on your experience, is that ratio within reason, or do you like to see it further apart, or how does that work?
So every year we have to have an actuary come in and tell us what our reserve is. And so that reserve is from the actuary of what is required to meet that. So that is something that we have that analysis every year.
So they're satisfied with that ratio? Good, thank you.
It does increase every year and it has been increasing every year. So moving on, I wanted to talk about, because we did start the previous workshop on like, when we did the financial statements of the $5 million in fund balance left over from fiscal year 24, which is included still in that cash balance that's starting out of that 30 million. So some of those fund balances are going to be used in fiscal year 25, and some of them are going to be budgeted in fiscal year 26. For fiscal year 25, we have 200,000 that's going to be used for the attorney's office construction. That's between the construction and the furniture. That's about total cost of what that's going to be. You'll see that contract coming for city council, but that's what we have set aside for that. In addition, to help offset the percentages based off of the COPS grant, we've allocated $100,000 of fund balance to go towards police to help offset those new hires that were not budgeted and that we received in mid-year. So we have allocated that. $40,000 for the BMX project. All of the other funds have been spent in a prior year, and so this is remaining for this fiscal year, what's left to finish out the project. And so that's additional fund balance that would be used for the pump track, and we had to put in some fencing and things like that just to finish up that project. And then moving on to fiscal year 26, these are items that are either budgeted or we hope to have discussion with today. So the first thing is $400,000 in the quiet zone. So we in the streets budget, this is budgeted as a project. And so we are using general fund balance to cover that project. And so it's a transfer from the general fund to the streets fund to cover that project. Second, I was notified by Larry that the police roof is needing replaced and that there's leaking going on. And so it is something that we cannot delay for another year. And so that cost is $520,000 to replace that roof. The last two things are newer. The first one, the property tax relief. This is something that is the mayor's program that he asked to budget for. And there's certain requirements that I'm working with the county to work to figure out the actual numbers of what this is going to be. But based off of emails, it's not, if we were to do it for 1 year, it's less than 300,000 is the thought process. I know that City of Boise has done this for many years, and there's certain requirements like passing an ordinance, and but it does have to be budgeted for us, for us to start that type of program. So that is something that is currently not budgeted, but we are working through the details to get that within the fund balance. And then the last thing is a transfer out into a new fund called, the Building Capital Fund. And this $3 million would help, to start saving for a larger building fund, whether, for, you know, the mayor talked about, library or senior center, or looking, there are other buildings across, like the expansion of the city hall, or even like when we get the third floor, repair and maintenance of, you know, redoing that as well. And so planning for that future. My thought with this fund, because we would have to do a resolution to create this fund, is to require CI3 with specific projects. So it's not just repair and maintenance of like smaller projects. These are going to be larger projects that are larger than $1 million in cost. So, but those are the specific fund balance projects, that have been requested. And, when we get into the numbers, the police roof has been budgeted and the quiet zone has been budgeted. And, within the, other three, the attorneys, the cops grant and the BMX project, those are all within the fiscal year 25 numbers. Any questions on this?
Yes.
So as much as I would, excited about property tax relief, I appreciate what the mayor's bringing this forward. With all due respect, it's an election year, so that's a nice gesture, but we are nearly $1 million away from being able to budget our fire budget. We've cut our police training budget in half. And I've always said that public safety has to be number one. If we've already collected this from good taxpayers, I would rather we not be cutting our emergency services so short that when these people need to dial 911, we have the best trained and best appropriated agencies ready to go to work. And so I would have a big problem with this year, and would suggest we strike that from discussion at this point.
Their thoughts on that, so, maybe I'll just address a little bit, but, and obviously it's up to the council, which is the proposal, on that, but there is, you know, adequate fund balance in here, for other items and things like that. It's kind of, we've looked at this in the past, so I understand it is an election year, but we can't blame everything on that. So, because we have talked about this in the past, we looked at it last year, in that regards, and wanted to kind of wait and see, as mentioned, who was doing it, and so kind of see how it went for them. I appreciate Rayland reaching out to them to kind of learn from their experience, how they've done it in that regard. So, we still have the money necessary. Obviously, we still have to police and fire, to make sure that they are. It is difficult to provide for those funds in that regard, but we do have adequate funding to make sure that they are completely funded through this budget process on that. But again, if the council wished to leave that balance in or leave that amount in the fund balance, or to move it somewhere else, or if they have a different project, it's openly up to the council. It is just a recommendation in that regard. So, but it would be good to know. I mean, if the majority of the council does not want to move in that direction, so that we know kind of where, if you wanted just to stay in that unreserved fund balance, or if there's a specific project that you'd like it to go. Yeah.
We're just hearing about it today, though, so I think some time, I mean, we may be able to get you that answer sooner than later, but I think to throw right now on the spot to have an answer off the cuff, I'd like some more time to research whether that's appropriate, or not just police and fire, but we're looking at raising the water fees, but yet giving it property tax relief. So I just need some more time to analyze what's the best answer.
And it would be, kind of like you mentioned, the last budget would be specific to those most in need. So it wouldn't just go to the general, although, but it'd be mostly to senior citizens that are on fixed income, like social security, and so that nature is where people.
The way that I've been working with the county to get the information is, as the state provides like a circuit breaker, which is for a specific income threshold and over 65, and for certain requirements on like the assessed value of your home. So really, that's for 1 acre or and up to a certain threshold. And so, and then for certain income limits as well. And so to get that number and so there would be that circuit breaker that they would have to qualify first. And then the city would, if we put this in place, the city would pay the difference only on the city of Fayetteville taxes. So it's not on their entirety of their property tax bill. It would only be on the city of Fayetteville taxes. And it's not a prepayment, it would be a reimbursement. So they would have to pay for their property taxes first, and then we would reimburse them directly. So those are the start of the program that I kind of worked through some of the specifics on. There would be an application process and some outreach that would need to happen, but, and so waiting from the list from the county to figure out how many residents and what the total cost would be.
So the numbers you're providing here throughout this, are they based on the 3% tax increase, or we take a no increase, or what are your numbers based on this year?
So the fund balance is not based off of any property tax, it's what's in fund balance. But the budget that you see on the general fund page, that is including the 3%, that is including annexation, and that's including new construction preliminaries that I got from the county. So
Is there some time in our budget hearing where we'll discuss 3%, 2%, or?
yeah, so that will be, it's at the end of this.
Okay, and then the next question was, what the budget proposals we've heard so far have been kind of all inclusive, except for the library. They had some needs. Can any of this money be used to do some of the repairs at the library, Rockville?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, some of this could be reallocated to the library as one-time fund balance to do some of those repairs. I will say I'm also working with Robin on seeing if any of those repairs qualify for CDBG funds as well, to see if we can use some of those as well.
Okay, because again, I just kind of going along the same lines as Councilor Williams said. We need to make sure our necessities are covered first, and so if those are a priority, or the library has those issues, I would like to look at them before we do maybe some other things on this floor. Thank you. I really have a question. I want to make sure I define what a budget cut. So if somebody has a $200,000 budget and they come into your office and say, this year's $300,000, and you say, no, you need to cut your budget, but they end up coming in with $210,000. Is it really a budget cut? Or when you say budget cut, people are cutting this year from what they had last year? For example, I'm talking about the training and stuff. Are we actually reducing the amount of training for police and fire?
So with budget cuts, some of that is that they come in with an increased budget to the first place. And it's not increase or decreasing compared to last year. It's really, can you get close to the revenue estimates that are increasing? So that's really what a budget cut would mean. Can you get close to the revenue estimates? And regards to police training, I have to do some research because part of what we did is in employee training, there was a mixture of travel and meeting and employee training. And so that did get separated between what was travel and meeting and what was employee training. So as there was some definition in that. I have not reviewed to see if police cut specifically the employee training after it was separated travel and meeting and employee training. I would be, I could ask someone to provide that detail of what he actually cut. I just know that when I saw the budget originally, it was all in employee travel or employee training, and it got moved and split. But there was no amount that I reduced. It just got split between the two GL codes. So that can happen without a reduction in the budget.
Sure. And I think that's a good point, Mike, is that we would probably should say their proposed budget. It's no different than what happens in the state. Send them our wish list is whatever we possibly could want and need. And then it's, when we say budget cut, it's cutting your proposed budget, not necessarily what your budget was last year. So it's a good point.
There.
Yeah.
Just to answer that though, I spoke with Sean and I guess I spoke with Deputy Chief Sablon. So, and unless I completely misunderstood him, they're reducing what they had for training the previous budget. And I thought he told me by 50%. And I've also spoken with fire, and both police and fire are here. They've requested more for training than what they're getting. So I understand the concept. But when they have a fund this big one year, it's that big this year, that's a budget cut. Something critical like training, which, as I said before, keeps us out of lawsuits, keeps us out of consent decrees, keeps us safe, keeps us alive, keeps our community taken care of. I'm not in favor of cutting those parts of the budget.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could, and I understand that, I was just talking more in general terms, and I think that's what we need to know. Is that cut, or is it just the proposed budget is cut? And so, again, it's a good point to make, then make sure we clarify which it is.
And,
Can I-
I really appreciate splitting travel and meeting and training. I think that's a good split. It really clarifies what money is going where.
And I just want to make the point that I did not go in and cut any budgets. So no budgets were cut by me. I did not go in and adjust any budgets other than to adjust the capital allocation plan, which really does add to the budgets, not cut it. And so if there was cuts and where they were, that was up to the departments and not up to myself or the mayor.
So they weren't given a cap that they had to come in under, they weren't given a threshold.
Total budget threshold.
Okay, well, that's essentially the same thing. In essence,
Where they cut would have been their determination, so, but they're, and I get what you're saying, Jeff, Councilor Millions, I do understand that. You know, I think I can work with Deputy Chief to get some reports out to the council on where the training has been, what's actually been used, and where it's at for the budget. So I'll be happy to do that.
but we could, if we chose to raise that threshold for fire, for police, right?
When we get to the general fund balance, we can talk about, because there's some thresholds and there's some things that we're gonna have to discuss as a bigger picture in general fund, so,
Thank you.
as to the property tax relief, and if you did want that budgeted, I would just ask, like, for some of these things that we're having discussions on for the next workshop that is on next Thursday, not the one tomorrow, but the week after, if maybe we can have decisions by then, so that would be helpful. So, on page 6, this is, both what's in the capital fund and the current city projects. And with that, so as you can see within the capital fund, I have my department, and then what was budgeted. And then now that we have budgeted, there is small amounts of, within the capital fund that are kind of part of the cost allocation, such as the audit, that are also within that, fund that are not on the specific project, as those are not projects. They're allocated based off of our costs, as well as like we have an obligation to do a transfer to Fund 56, which is the capital maintenance. And it's within our MOU with the college. They make a payment and then we match it. And so that goes into Fund 56 and that transfer comes out of capital 50 for Fund 58. So within these projects, as you can see, We have $25,000 for public art. This is, more for, looking and partnering for public art displays around the city. The biggest one that we're currently working on, to try, with design and everything is the 10th Avenue underpass, underneath the bridge where that can get a lot of graffiti. We have public art there that would think that, defers graffiti that will help. So things like that. IT is always working to get, city fiber to all the, businesses or not businesses, to all the city buildings. And so every year we budget, $50,000 for fiber extension, to really work through that. The airport, as you know, within their strategic plan and discussion, they asked for, city input of about $750,000 a year to help with improvements out of the airport. This year, with working with, Scott Thompson, we were able to dedicate $100,000 from the capital fund, and then there's $100,000 within the airport fund. CEC has asked for some shuttle carts, for scrubber, parking lot gates, and then, sidewalk improvements. Some of these are split, such as the sidewalk improvements are split between the capital fund and the park impact fund, as the CIP on the park impact fund only allows for about 50% of that paid, that fund.
Question.
Yeah.
The CEC being the cultural center,
Yeah, the O'Connor Fieldhouse.
so the shuttle carts, what are those for?
I would defer to, Ron or to, Rob.
Okay. I just want to make sure that, when they talked about the hotel was going to provide shuttles for parking and things like that, so that's not the same thing. We're not paying.
I believe this is to help line on the grounds itself.
Okay, but not to pick up that parking problem that the hotel's causing.
I don't believe so, no.
Correct. Yeah, it's for shuttling, just around the center in general.
Okay,
And some of that may change depending on how the negotiations go with the county and all that. And so that's what the purpose is.
okay, for employees or for workers, not to pick up people for parking is what I'm getting at. For that,
It may be for both, I'm not positive.
because I thought the hotel people were paying for that cost.
You have 2 cards as well, still that we purchased, I think, last year's budget, or maybe the year before, that are supposed to be used for that as well.
Yeah, so those are used, for like the downtown, so I know those can't be used up there, and like I said, I'm not sure, I can circle this really quick, that, see.
But in my conversation with John, he did express a desire to shuttle people around the grounds for different events. Not specific for the rodeo or anything else, but he did express the desire to, run people from one end to the other if they needed or people that had trouble getting. But I don't think that would negate the hotel's responsibility for.
Yeah, and they are contracted shuttles, so shuttle service on that. So, because I know kind of going off of that, I've seen events, obviously this is well before the hotel. And I know, because my mother fell out of the cart last year at an event that she was getting shuttled to at the new fair building. And so they use, obviously you still, even with regardless of closed, they're not, would still shuttle people to the rodeo from, the Wolf Field and had a park over there to the fair center. So I'm not sure.
I just wanted to make sure it's not, we're not, that the shuttle agreement that we came up with the hotel for those events is not our cost. That's all I'm trying to make sure.
Yeah, and I know that they have, because we've been talking with recently, Jenkins and myself, that they are already contracted for shuttle service and for this year.
Okay. And then the parking lot gates, where would those go?
So the parking lot gates were recently added. They're more for looking at 21st Avenue parking lot. And then also, I know that there's been, we just had this discussion with Lon about looking at, if there's traffic, people will stay through the parking lot. And so trying to figure out solutions for that, so that when we do upgrades to the parking lot, that doesn't get damaged from.
And this question's for you, sir. Parking lot expansion at CEC, is that done, getting done, is it budgeted? I mean, where is that portion? Because it's been discussed for a long time. Are we gonna have parking lot expansion this year?
So in which areas specific?
East of Simplot Stadium, going into Gagliola Field on that edge, remember we talked about
That area?
gaining 150 to 150 parking spots, is that gonna happen?
So I mean, look to really as well. I do not believe that paving for that is in here. So I think the plan is the check plan is Rob's speaking of, so you may know the answer of utilizing that kind of as there's right now without paving, but going in, cutting down the grass short and drying it out and then striping it, but not with paving. Does that sound?
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. So this year, it's not gonna be paved, it's gonna be striped, it's gonna be open for parking basically on the grass field. And then as we move into the future, then we will assess, again, a lot of this is contingent on what the agreement ends up being with the county and how that all plays out. But we're gonna have it all set up so that there will be sufficient parking this year for fair and rodeo and other events, so that there's not a congestion problem.
I thought I had heard that we were gonna use recycled asphalt on a portion of it. That change?
We had talked about that, but then we decided that that probably wasn't the best way to improve the lot, because if you put it all down, then in the future, if you want to do something else there, you have to go pull it all out. And since we don't know what the future holds for some of those areas, we didn't want to go invest any time in that. We're just going to go in and stripe it with chalk lines and set up the parking so that it's usable.
That'll be for the rodeo and football. So the fair wants that area left while it is for the parking. So we'll let that be for that time. And that's where it's at, because that's first. And then after that is when you go in straight after the rodeo, and also most likely for this, we like the public as well. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So Rob, will that parking area go east of Taco Time too? How far east will it go? Right behind Taco Time.
Yeah.
There's
Councilor Stoddard, the parking area that we're proposing now is right between the Taco Time and the stadium. There's an area there that's been used in the past for parking.
right.
So we're gonna stripe that out, and then there's additional striping back by the large parking lot by the new fair building.
Okay.
And so there will be additional parking there. And then also at Wolf Field, we were gonna stripe in parking in those lots in the field as well.
Thank you.
So as you can see within the capital fund, there's also quite a few parks, capital items as well. The autonomous mowers that Tiffany talked about, the music park update, the design on the tennis courts, and then some four-wheelers for ice removal and snow removal, and a walk remover. And then, some of the bigger, city projects, we talked about the police roof, we talked about the property tax rate and the creation of the building fund. But one of the new items, when I heard about the police roof, it was just in an offhand meeting that I had asked Larry if he knew of any other projects that needed to be done around the city. We don't actually have really when HVAC systems need to be replaced, when roofs on other areas, other buildings need to be replaced. And so there's not this tracking mechanism that I can even budget for. And so what we asked, or what we're asking for within the general fund, is a study similar to what the library did that can tell us when things need to be replaced in, for all city buildings. So that estimate's we're budgeting about $250,000 to do all city buildings. So
Raylan, I feel like we've done this once in the years past. Are you familiar with the previous one?
I am not. I've not seen it. I think we've done a lot of master plans that tell us about the infrastructure underground and that timing, but really city buildings have not seen any sort of plans.
I have a question. Actually from Parks, and you may have answered this at the last meeting when I was sick, but I see the projects here. And then we hear a lot of complaints about playground equipment, like Ruby Park and some of the older parks that have been sort of forgotten about, I guess. And I know you did some improvements this year. Are all the improvements done, or have we budgeted some for next year, or is the playground equipment being replaced, or how?
Like in other parks, or about your own or in?
Yeah, because the only one I see here is the music park and then the design for the memorial tennis courts. And I probably missed it, because I wasn't here, but, do we have a plan to take care of some of the playground equipment at like Lee Park and, there was another one, but maybe it was Memorial.
But so Ruby and Memorial Playground equipment's getting replaced this year, this month actually, and then a little bit into July. Those are the two playgrounds in the city that are the most outdated and the most unsafe. The rest of the playgrounds in this city, yes, there are some that could use updating because of the volume of kids that are using them. But out of this year's budget, I'm fixing them. Some of that, there's a lot of broken plastic, so I'm just using this year's budget to prolong the life of those playgrounds as they're so safe and usable. And then throughout the next couple of years, I'm hoping to update them or grow them. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
so Ruby and Memorial, our playground equipment is being replaced this year.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
perfect. And then we talked a little bit about this, so, in the bathroom or whatever, is that something that is in your budget to?
Yeah, we should be able to replace them. The issue that we're having with soap dispensers, sinks, toilets, they're getting vandalized. And there's only so much we can do. We can continue to repair and fix them, but if we're not able to catch the people that are vandalizing the restrooms, then we would probably take the council to decide if, we wanted to providing restrooms or how we can provide restrooms better to prevent that vandalism and destruction of the restrooms from happening. Yeah, but we'll cross that bridge.
Okay,
Later.
thank you.
Yeah.
So then before we get into. Before we get into general fund specifically, I wanted to just talk about some citywide decisions. And so, for COLA, we budgeted $1.25 per employee. Now, I know fire negotiations are still underway, so that number hasn't been finalized, but the total cost impact for all funds is just over $1 million. This can range on how much an employee is getting. If they're paid a lower amount, their percentage will be higher than if they're paid a higher amount, their percentage is going to be a little bit lower. We have merit of a $500 per employee budgeted, but merit would be determined after the evaluation process. And so this does seem like a small amount, but within the budget right now with all the factors, this is something that this is what we have. And it doesn't mean that each person is just going to get 500. Merit can be changed depending on that, based off of either, an employee can get a higher amount or nothing at all. So just depending on their evaluation, that criteria we'll work with Michelle to figure out and process. ICRIM, I just got notified this week that insurance did increase. And so this line item got increased for all department budgets. From last year it was 752,000. This year it was 910. So there is an increase in that cost that did go up. And then we are budgeting a 4% increase on the city side for health insurance, which does impact all departments. So those are kind of the citywide costs that are spread out among each fund. So.
And on the micro deal, that kind of sticks out, which is my draw, because they seem to settle about everything out of court and never really, bring stuff to fruition. Do we have any control over them at all as to what to settle, what not to settle?
I'm not involved in that process, so I would I would refer to Debbie, back there.
And I can say Oscar's been working more closely now that he's been in place with the litigation attorney for IFM. And so he's involved more in the process, so he's hoping to have a little bit more say, but there hasn't been anything further with him, but we're hoping to make that a better streamline with Oscar being involved.
But like I say, sometimes we have to take a stand, and I'm very familiar with corporate lawyers, and we have to do the same thing. Everybody, they always want to settle out of court. And, you know, when we have a good footing on somebody's lost it, I think it's worth the effort to see them through, so that's why I have.
We don't say.
So, and that, along the same lines, my question. So is this $158,000 increase based on our recent situations? What had prompted the increase?
So my understanding is some of that increase is due to, it's one of the letter that they sent, is due to the insurance market. So it says, they talked about how the insurance market's been quite volatile. And the claims are higher as well, which has led to increased premiums for everybody. Looking to see if they really don't give specifics on like why our premiums have gone up specifically. I know Debbie sent me a video today from my friend. I have not been able to watch it to see why specifically. But I will say we did go through a analysis of all our property, and we have a lot more property on the books that's now insured, and so there is that number that has gone up as well. So
Right.
value.
Raylan, can I interject as well? When they evaluated property this year, in the past, they have not always evaluated the open space. And because that open space has contained a lot of inventory, they felt that that should be evaluated this year. So those numbers were put into the mix as well. And I think it obviously kind of increased our property from what we've had evaluated in the past as well.
Okay, so on page 8, this should look very familiar because this is, for the last couple of years, I have presented this. And this is really a breakdown of general fund by department, the total revenues and expenditures. You know, these numbers are still, they can change, you know, they shouldn't change drastically, but we're still getting some estimates and so they can still change. As you can see, total number at the end, plan use of fund balance is about 352,000. That's right where I expect it to be because we do have the police roof in here of 520,000. That did have planned use of fund balance. And so as long as that number is less than that 520,000, we're right where we need to be. As you can see, both police and fire, even with the increased estimates from property tax, and the additional amount from the changing of the URA value, from 80% to 90%, between those two departments, and the revenues that set aside for each of those, about 1.8 million, budgeted that way. There are some discussions that I think we need to have and looking at recommendations and trying to figure out solutions and how we look at problem solving this because it's not an easy answer. And there's not a way to just balance it and make it look good. So the first recommendation I have, and all of these are just recommendations to really talk through and try to figure out how you guys would like to see it, how you would like to progress going forward, and really what the priorities are. Because I know police and fire are a priority within the city. specifically when it comes to property taxes and making sure they're funded, for their business. So, first recommendation would be to continue staying the same, where we track a negative amount and we use general fund balance to cover these negative amounts. This has potential risk, because we do track these and because by resolution we track them. On our financial statements, it'll go from a positive number to a negative number. That negative number can potentially look like a risk when we go out for funding and bonding, things like that, where we're looking at different options. And so, it becomes a risk because there's not, just showing that negative over and over again, that those departments are not funded, that public safety is not funded at that adequate amount to cover their budget. And we're relying on general fund, other revenues. There is definitely a risk. The other risk with this is that we're relying on fee revenues from building, and planning and zoning. And those fees, obviously, as we grow, those fees do cover that amount. But in a downturn, that means that not only would we have those departments that we would have to reduce size, but then that would impact police and fire departments because we wouldn't have those fees to rely on any longer. And that's not the first step where you want to look at layoffs for sure. And I'm not saying we're in that solution right now, but with planning for the future and any economic downturn, we don't know when that'll be, or we didn't see 2007 recession until it happened. And so that's where I have to look at all the risks. And so this is not a great option, but this is something that we can stick to if we want to just carry the status quo. The second option is removing the tracking of police and fire. So that means that they're not maintaining the fund balance, and so if they are good with their budgets, they don't retain a fund balance, and if they're not good with their budgets, it uses fund balance. But then we're not tracking separately for them. It's just general fund as a whole, and it's not tracked on the financial statements. This also can be a concern, with that accountability. So I would leave that up to city council if they did or did not want to see that. A third option would be reallocating property taxes. But with reallocation, that means that there is going to be a reduction in services and other funds, and an increase in fees to cover those services, or just a reduction in services in general. If we were, for example, if we were to reduce it from the street department, they only have gas tax and sales tax that comes in and helps them. And gas tax can be very volatile depending on the price of fuel, and sales tax, same difference. Right now it's very volatile. And so if that's how our streets are being built and maintained, that becomes a problem if there's not property tax to back that up. For parks, most of the property tax is not even covering the full staff. It's sales tax, so it's still very volatile. So if you were to reallocate, it would be a reduction in services for those departments, and it can be pretty detrimental for those departments. The last option is research additional fees. Whether it's, there's been a lot of talk about mitigation fees. I don't know if that's the solution, or even looking at like an admin fee to cover costs. Can't just charge a fee just to cover, like, Ed Justin look into what state law said about fees. And we really have to be specific about what costs we're covering, but looking at fees and what fees we can charge to maybe cover that cost, and what methods. So those are kind of the 4 options to really look at how how we balance police and fire within the general fund. I would really like your feedback because it does put us in a tough situation. There is just, unfortunately, with property tax, there is not enough money to cover the growth that is happening. And with sales tax flat, some of the fine revenue flat are reducing. It really does have an impact on general fund in those departments.
And so I'll touch on that real quick and get into some discussion on that. And really appreciate Ray Lynn. So we met today and her thinking and looking at solutions to these problems. As I believe all of you are probably aware, City of Star has initiated what they call a mitigation fee. That started a few years ago. So that's a fee that all residential building permits, I believe it's just residential on that. They paid this extra fee, then that goes in and that funds their police and fire. And that fee has grown quite a bit over the last few years. And I know there's a lot of questions about, well, sounds like an impact fee, that they call it a mitigation fee, but it hasn't been tested in court. We haven't seen any legislation. Wouldn't surprise me if we see some of this next session, limiting the city's ability to do that. And so we do have questions of, because again, is it an impact fee in disguise? And so that's the concern that we have on that. Now they're funding again and again. It's a one-time payment funding an ongoing source of cost on that. So they kind of plan it up, I think, 3 years cost that they figure for the police and fire. But they are really hurting. They've grown so fast and they just have no other option. So that's why they've gone that way. So we talked about, is that a proposal to come forward? Like, it's not a good proposal, at least in our opinion. Is it even legal? Is it appropriate? It's putting all of that on the building community. And I get it, they need to pay their fair share in that regards, but is it appropriate to do that? And so it was actually Raylan, as she was brainstorming about, what about like a user fee that could be used in? That could go into everything across the city. Maybe a certain percentage, and then that could be allocated to, again, police and fire to help make up the difference that we see there. Due to, again, us not being able to take the full construction, new construction and annexations every year hinders us. And then that's a compounding issue because it compounds every year on top of each other. If we didn't have that, if we could have took 100% of new construction in the last 4 years, I don't think we'd be having this problem with this discussion, to be honest. And as we talked, as you know, police and fire, it's like, I kind of describe like as a web. It is a web that really goes into every fiber of our community. If you don't have police protection, if you don't have fire services, that affects every single person. So even if you don't call a fire engine out, if you don't have a burglary and have the police come out to you, it doesn't matter. You are chain affected. You don't have a police force, you don't have a fire department, you will be affected on that. So that's where this user fee that we feel could get that nexus that you need to have, because it affects everybody. And so by spreading that out over all the fees across the city, could generate some of this income to make up that gap. And again, we'd have to get the city attorney involved and make sure, where's that comfortable that we do have that nexus to show up. But again, and I know our police chief, our chief will say 100%, yes, it affects every single person in your community and those that visit your community on that. So we thought that would be maybe a more appropriate way to go on that. But again, wanted to get discussion. I just want to throw that out there.
Who pays the user fee?
So it'd be like, it would just be, and obviously this would still be determined, a lot of discussion needs on that. But it should be something like, for even Parks and Rec classes, you're paying for a building permit, if you're paying, probably not utilities, we leave those alone, but any type of fee that you're paying the city, there'd be, or, paying to the city, there'd be like a 5% or 10%, whatever it was. Is that my time?
No, that's regular. I don't know why.
So it would be just spread out across all of those different fees throughout the city.
So basically the residents. Would be paying.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question. I just want to turn this on. So I have a question about that then, and kind of going back to the, like what we were talking about as the examples of water fees. So these sort of fee increases, the water fees, the user fee, that kind of stuff. I want to make sure I understand this. So we every meeting that we have and we talk about growth, we talk about impact fees, the developers paying this huge amount. And how this is gonna be so great, and this is, growth paying for itself, and so on and so forth. And then we come to these budget meetings, and we're here like, well, we're probably gonna have to increase the water fees. We're gonna have to now it's years of it. So at what point do you see this growth actually paying for itself? Because what I'm seeing, and I want to be sure I'm not wrong, is it looks like the residents that live here are paying for some of this growth in their fees, and we keep hearing that's not the case, so.
So I think it's a matter of growth would pay for itself if it was slower growth. But we have unprecedented growth where, instead of growing at 2 or 3%, we're growing at 6%. And not only just 1 year, for the last 3 years, it's been unprecedented growth. And so the needs and the requests for those significant level of services have increased so fast, that I don't think anybody in the city could have predicted that. And with the way, especially with property tax, with the way that property tax limits to where you don't even get 100% growth, and then there's delays. So for example, if somebody buys a house today, we are not going to see that revenue from that house until next levy. Not the one in September, but there's a full year delay on that. Yeah, we're gonna have to provide services right now. So that is something that we're having to deal with, where there is a delay in when we receive the funds and when we're providing the services.
So it's kind of like what Councilor Static was saying about how we're just sort of borrowing from whatever's coming next to be able to sustain services.
Yeah, I think that's why, I try to think not just this budget year, but having a 5-year plan and having a 10-year plan to really say, how quickly are we growing? But if I only, in the 5-year plan, my estimates were only 3% growth. But that's not growing,
Right,
so,
and keeps,
yeah.
and then they keep approving more and more and more. So we're not doing anything to slow that down either. But then we hear at the last meeting that if we don't approve it, we won't be able to afford our police and fire. So is that accurate?
Well, there's timings of when a development is approved to when they actually pull the building permit. So from when council approves something, it takes between a year and a year and a half for that revenue to come in. So I don't think there's that direct impact right away. It's just it's always a timing issue of how to, and yes, there is always issues because, it doesn't help with the economy, with inflation, with the cost of construction, with the cost of wages that have raised, significantly, being competitive, the cost of health insurance. All of those have raised. So our economy directly impacts our budget too, and what we can do, so the tariffs, and they have a direct impact on our costs, like all of that. And those are all decisions out of what we can actually control. And so all I can control is what, with growth, because people want to move here. So if we can build some more commercial to help get sales tax, if we can, get people down to downtown so that they spend more time here, even though it's asking more services, there's hopefully an impact to get additional revenues as well.
Yeah, I guess I have concerns because originally when this started, you said there was not enough property tax to cover the property, which is, but that's not what we've been hearing. We keep hearing how growth is paying for itself. So now we're hearing about user fees and water fees and stuff that's being put on the current residents to sustain whatever we have to sustain for future growth in residents. So I just wanted to be clear that that's the case. We don't have the property taxes to keep up with.
With what the expectation and level of service is, the property tax is not going to cover. If we wanted to provide a lower level of service, that's not my decision.
Yeah. Well, I'm not necessarily on board with providing a lower level of service for sure. I don't know what the answer is for police and fire. I think that they are our biggest department and a huge asset, and obviously we need to fund them. However, we need to do that because they are used by, and it's not like, I guess like the mayor was saying, it's not so much using them, the fact that you probably will need at some point to have them available. So I do agree with that part of it, and I've always been a big proponent of public safety. So how we get there, I don't know. Well, I guess we'll have that discussion, but I guess I just don't want to continue this idea that growth is taking care of all this, but it's really coming back to the current president.
Well, and our hands are really tied. So when House Bill 389 passed on the property tax and it changed the way that new construction and annexation were calculated. So we only got 90% of those. It also changed the preliminary levy rate. So we used to be able to, you know, that amount was calculated on last year's levy rate. So the more value you add to your city, the levy rate goes down. That's just how the calculation works. And so now there's this calculation on this preliminary levy rate that it tries to calculate current year valuation instead of last year, current year, which adds more, which then reduces that amount and makes it a lower amount even. So instead of trying to get, and does it add up to be millions of dollars? Not right away, but the impact over time is compounding, and that's where that impact can be quite high.
So what's your recommendation?
So out of the four options that I would say, first, you know, looking at the fee, you know, adding more revenue to police and fire so that I don't have to come to them every year and be like, how can you reduce your budget? Because I don't want to ask that question, but all the other department budgets are not growing, and police and fire are the ones that are growing. And we're slowly reducing all the fund balance, which is not a practical way to run the city. And then, you know, I think for tracking the fund balance, there's good reasons to, and there are good reasons not to. I don't know if Rochelle is here, but she can provide some history on that. But there was a resolution to track that, and so the only way we'd be able to remove it is by a resolution as well. So
And do police and fire have a solution or a suggestion?
I will say for police, we did cut off over 600,000 from our initial budget. And we are looking at different ways to increase revenue. We have some individuals that we did not charge before for services. And so we are going to start charging for security at events that we did not previously. So that will generate a little bit more income to cover some of our overtime costs for our officers moving overtime. And I do have an answer also, going back to your training question. So this year for fiscal year 25, we only had one account, it was employee training. And for fiscal year 26, we will be having employee training and travel meeting. And we cut the employee training quite a bit, and we added to the travel fund, but overall we cut out $76,000 for both of those accounts from this year to next year. For 25, fiscal year 25, and fiscal year 26, we decreased $76,000 off the budget for travel. So we have continued to cut costs, and we're looking at ways to improve revenue.
And forgive me if I need to apologize to you and everybody else in this room. I had understood you said that when you finished working with fire, the budget that you are working on us approving was contingent upon the trajectory of building permits continuing the same as they have. Did I understand you wrong?
no, that is correct. So we are supplementing police and fire budgets with building fees.
Right.
That is why we
So
are
if you
using-
don't continue at the current rate, we won't be able to make the budget you just agreed to with them to present to us.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah.
On the 76,000, I understand you split it out from training on the 76,000. How close did we come this year to, have we used the training budget?
No, we were not. We have it split between admin training and then the rest of it. So we still have 56% available as of today in admin employee training. And for the other employee training, we have 29. And we should be at 32% left in our fiscal year. So we're getting close on our regular, all the other employee training, our admin one, we still have.
So you need,
We're nowhere near, we're not going to go over budget this year for it.
Right.
We have to cut 76,000.
right, but how much will be left is what I'm saying. So after you do all the training, all the required training, everything that those in that expertise say that needs to be done. My point is, will you have money left over in the training budget? So if we want to supplement the 76,000, but you're not using all of that, you see where I'm trying to go?
Yes.
You're only going to use 50 of the 76. So
So,
that still gets everybody all the training that is required and needed
yes,
more. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is what's the number?
the current numbers, it looks like, if I had to estimate, about 20,000.
And to Council Doty, with all the scrutiny that we've been under and all the accusations of being over budget, which is factually incorrect.
Right.
We have put a huge cease on training, on sending people to things that we should be sending people to because of optics or politics or an election year, whatever it is. So you can take the heat off you guys. So, but there are things that we need to send our people to that we're just not sending them to because I don't want to keep sending people to these things until we figure out exactly where our budget's at.
Fair enough. And I think travel's gone up significantly as well.
Well, and then one more, to answer the Councilor Renish's question about, I got hired in 2022 and 2022 and 2023, maybe Robin can assist me with this, but in those 2 years, I know that there were so many developments that were approved, just those 2 years alone. And then it started tapering off in the last year-ish. And I sat there in every meeting at city council and listened to all these doors being approved, being told that it's going to take a while, like Ray Lynn is saying, for the budgets to catch, for the, property tax to catch up years and years. But now we're three to 4 years in and we're reducing it. But back then we had 50% less officers as well. We've hired over 70 new employees in the last 2.5 years since I've been here. So, just to keep up with that growth and, just to close this out, I'm a firm believer that developers are not coming here because it's not safe. Developers, businesses, Fred Meyer, these people are not coming here because they feel unsafe. They're coming here because they get the adequate services from police and fire that we can provide within our scope of a day, and our officers and our firefighters have never worked harder. I mean, I know him very well. Myself, I am very demanding. He's very demanding. We're trying to give your residents the best service possible, but by also being fiscally responsible. And that at some point, our employees are going to get burned out, and we're doing with the most we can with what we have. But
Over then, I have a few questions. When I look at police and fire revenue, what makes up that revenue? What makes up that whole number?
So for fire, it is property tax and it is the rural contract. Those are
That's it? Yeah.
that is it for fire.
And then for police?
For police, the majority of it is property tax. And then there's the SRO contracts. There's the liquor revenues. And I apologize, there's also in fire electrical franchise fees. So both police and fire get electrical franchise fees.
And there's citation revenue?
There is, yes, fines and fees. And
And then there's
then so franchise
you said something
fees,
about permit fees?
the state liquor apportionment fees, some pet license revenue, the reimbursement from the special security. some donations, court fines, and then the SRO contracts.
How much, what I'm kind of going after is, how much is coming from, says some was coming from the building department and print, anything?
So that deficit amount, the $1,000,032, that's gonna come from the building department. So we don't actually allocate the revenues to police. We will cover the deficit as a year-end transfer.
So real quick, that's because there's fire battery fees also correct.
That is
That'd
correct.
be, I mean, lumped into the building.
That is part of, yeah, so that covers the fire
I'm not
prevention.
sure what that, I think it's 10%. I remember, I don't know what the total amount would be though, but
Yeah, so for fire prevention fees, those just cover the budget for fire prevention. So those are the fire reviews.
So the way we have done it for years is police got about 48 mils of total revenue from property tax. Fire got about 24, roughly 25. Are we still following that formula?
It's very close, yeah. Because like with the foregone last year and allocating additional amounts to them, they've gone up a little bit in percentages, but those percentages are very close.
And so if I understood what you were saying earlier, if we were to increase the mill rate that goes to police and fire, we've got to take that from streets or somewhere else.
Streets, capital fund, parks, library, any of the other property tax things.
I have seen the bottom fall out of the economy before, and I know how devastating that is. And I feel like we're running on a razor's edge here. And so I get concerned that, you know, I don't have an answer on, it just worries me when I see this kind of thing.
It has been, since last year, it has been a major concern of mine. And if I had a solution that I could just fix this, I would. But there's not an easy fix, unfortunately. Between the legislative changes, between property tax, the sales tax kind of not increasing, but decreasing or even holding steady. And that's what's happened to a lot of our revenues. And then with increase in expenditures between increased health insurance, and normal insurance, workers' comp, all of those things increasing, that just adds more cost. That is just, you know, is it something that I'm supposed to say to employees, sorry, we can't offer you a COLA this year? But I mean, those are the decisions that run through my head sometimes to try to balance this budget.
kind of along those lines, you may have actually been police chief at the time. And so, and this is just my understanding, so you may know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is when the bottom did fall out back in 2007, 2008, I believe that at that time that they did go, the administration went to some of those departments, say, hey, you need to reduce your mill rate to put it in the police, put it in to help them go through the next couple of years. Is that, and I've heard that, and I don't know, does that sound familiar at all, or anything like that, or
I don't know whether they changed the mill rate.
just the percentage?
Right, yeah, but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I made chief in 2007 and 2008.
So it would have been, yeah, maybe it must be like,
So the timing was perfect. But yeah, I definitely don't want to make a correction on the back of employees, you know, and that's not where I'm going at all. I would love to find a way to cover that $1 million deficit without taking it from the building department. If there was another way to do that, you're the expert at that.
The only way, like I said, if we were to reallocate, and I think it's a bigger discussion, is you're gonna see a reduction in other departments. And that, you know, since I came in, I have tried not to, I know previous practice was to just go in by the finance director and cut budgets. I really don't want to take that approach because I think it's departments are going to know their budgets better than me on what is priority. Doesn't mean I'm going to not have a discussion with them, but So I think if that was the council's decision was to reallocate property tax, then it would take additional discussions with departments to try to figure out what was gonna get cut and what the impact was.
I have a question, before we come up with the solution. I heard, or it's probably rumor at this point, but is the county going to charge us for fire dispatch?
Yes.
And so have we figured out how much that's going to cost? And is that something we're looking at in this budget?
It's $100,000. Next fiscal year,
It's 100,000 for what?
for the next fiscal year, this figure is 1,000 this budget.
So, and they already charge us how much? Didn't you?
Charge fire.
They don't charge fire, but they charge police, right?
I believe it's 300 and something thousand a year.
It's about 325 last I heard.
So 325 for police and 100 for fire, so almost $250,000 to the county for dispatch, and they have our 911. Just making sure. Had the number right.
Few comments. Right in looking ahead, you know, there's not a lot we can do about what the state does to us. We're dealt these cards right now, especially with tax relief, which really, to me, isn't really tax relief, but with the potential of the energy prices going down, i.e. oil, gas, I would guess that people would probably travel more, and maybe the street department get more taxes from that in the future, would you say?
So we have seen, I know, so every year, there's kind of three or four bills that provide transportation funding. One's pretty set and it's just a set amount. Actually, two of those are. The third is directly from like the fuel tax of like usage. And then the last one is really based off of legislation every year. So if that legislation did not pass every year, our fuel tax would be, and I have a worksheet on what the estimates are. Our fuel tax would go from about 5 million to 3 million. Just with that one piece of legislation on whether it does or does not pass every year. And so that is a big risk, especially for our streets. And I know before ARPA and before urban renewal, there was a trend that there was not enough revenue in streets to cover maintenance. And so there's definitely, you know, a big concern because we don't want to get to that again. And I know that traffic impact fees will help with the bigger intersections, but that doesn't cover the smaller streets that are still, it doesn't cover the chip seal. And street equipment is not cheap. I mean, you know, so.
That's way go up to Kimball and Tenth and all the other streets. We're way behind on that. That's not the street department, it's called that. It's just, the other point I would just want to make again, I hate to beat a dead horse on my Monday council meeting. You know, we have to plan ahead for this thing to slow down some. And when this thing slows down, we don't have as many building permits. But we have all the services yet, we have to supply it all. So if we depend on building permits because we're approving all these subdivisions and this growth and we're, you know, like I mentioned Monday night, we haven't even collected taxes on the 9,000 plus projects we've got. But we're still gonna have to supply services or they're getting Robin Peter to pay Paul, and this is gonna catch up with us. That's why we have to, you know, we really have to think twice about this growth. And it's definitely not paying for itself. Right now it is because of building permits, but what happens in 5 or 10 years when I growth rates move down to say 2 or 1%, then what do we do? We still have to supply all these services, but we won't have the money for it. So I think, Councilor Willard, I think we need to think about that because it's great now, but it isn't going to be that way in 5 or 10 years. We're going to be way behind again. So, thank you.
So before I go to, do we have other presentations that are going on? Are we dragging this one out too long to put into the other one or?
This is kind of, I mean, there's still more
All right.
to that Raylan's getting percent, but this is kind of different.
This is general fund
Yeah.
and balancing as a whole. You're gonna hear from every single department about their budgets, but this is the reality of where the general fund balance is.
Well, I do have a couple of comments. Just food for thought here. You know, we talked about, we asked the question, you know, does growth pay for itself? When will growth pay for itself? Does growth ever pay for itself? I think we need to take a very careful look at that question because, is growth paying for itself or is growth paying for everything? Okay? I mean, just because we added 2 new subdivisions doesn't mean it caused the growth of the police department. And just because we added, you know, 10,000 new houses over the last 5 years, doesn't mean it caused the, you know, the senior center with to go on. I mean, these are, it doesn't, you know, I print it may have some marginal, but, the cost of growth here is employee salaries. And I can't imagine a single company where if we stop growth, we would say, sorry, we have to reduce your salary. I mean, or sorry, we've reduced growth or stop growth, so let's, you know, stop your health insurance. So I think when we talk about growth, talking about growth of the organization, growth of the employees, and I'm not so sure that new growth needs to pay for all of the cities ills. So when we talk about, you know, something, you know, either eliminating line items versus reallocating at the year's end, whatever we do to make police whole, it's very clear that either our public safety is made whole or maybe our street fund is made whole. That there is not a situation out there where we can say we want our police department to be the best and we want to fix all of our roads and sidewalks. Is there a situation where we can see that happen? I don't think there's a situation. But the issue isn't necessarily what we're spending. I think the issue is how we generate income. Because we could stop growth today and not issue another permit, and then we're going to be short revenue. Or we could wait for the economy to tank, which I'm not seeing any signs of that. And then we're saying, okay, how do we generate more revenue? So I'm wondering whether or not the solution to our budget woes isn't stopping growth and whatever. How do we generate more revenue? How do we be counterintuitive? How does the police department generate more revenue? How does the fire department? And how do we as a whole stop looking at the city like these guys are doing bad and these guys are doing good, so let's take from these guys that are doing good and give it to these guys that are doing bad. Why can't we look at the city as our health of one full healthy organization and say, how can we raise revenues at one organization to help pay for revenues in another organization? Do we need to go with a user fee? Do we need to go with a per person entry fee to Honor Fieldhouse regardless of the event? Do we need to increase fees across the board to help make the city as a whole more healthy? So I don't think it's a matter of cutting to make ends meet or stopping growth to make ends meet. I think it's a matter of how do we generate more income for the city to make ends meet. And I'm just not sure whether or not we want to put the brakes on anything at any point in time until we can say, yes, this is absolutely how we do this stuff. It's just a simple truth. If our economy tanks today and we have $30 million in the bank, how far do we last on that $30 million? 3 months?
6 months.
6 months. So.
Spare, I just totally disagree with your analysis, Mike. Who pays for all these increases that you talked about? Taxpayers do. Right?
One way or the other, yeah, they help.
Yeah. So their taxes are gonna go up. Solves the problem, their taxes gonna go up. So how does that solve the problem?
We have a delicate situation. Either reduce services or we find some way to pay for it.
And like I say, we're so far behind that eventually, if we don't do something about this, we're gonna have to reduce services because we can't pay for it. Period.
I also want to point out again that the county clerk has done a workshop with Nampa and I think some other places to try to help answer these questions. So I would really like to bring him in for a workshop for us to see if it gives us any insight. Maybe it won't, maybe it won't help at all, but it's worth a shot. And so I'd like to bring it up again, so we can, to have that done.
I know there's been discussion, I know I feel comfortable with Ray Lynn being able to present rather than bringing in somebody from the county on it. And no offense to Mr. Hogebaum at all, but Ray Lynn also knows our finance extremely well.
Well, I think this was more about like, property taxes and growth, all that kind of stuff too. And apparently, I mean, I'm sure Nampa trusts their finance director too. It's not bad. It's getting a different perspective and more information. But from what I heard from people in Nampa, they were surprised by some of the, just kind of putting two and two together. So I don't know why it's necessarily a bad thing to gain more and more insight and then decide what we want to do as a city. It's just gaining information, in my opinion.
Well, the subject of growth is far more complicated than yes or no. It's like, so if you say growth is causing us a financial problem, you just stop growth, or you flip a coin and say every other developer gets a yes, and every other developer gets a no. How do you determine what growth is good and what growth is bad, or it's all growth bad and no growth is good? I mean, when you decide who you're going to let build a house in the city of Caldwell, what do you base it on? They have people come through the door that want to build in Caldwell. They come, they present to council, and we have to base our yes or no decision on something. So I would never say, developer A, you get a yes, developer B, you get a no, because growth isn't paying for itself. So we would have to say, developer A and B, neither one of you get to build a house here because growth is not paying for itself. And so I have not been able to overcome the idea that stopping growth is going to solve our problem. But at the same time, making a choice between one person and another, whether they can build or not build, I don't know how you do that. If they're a legitimate person that meets our standards, what do you say?
Even if we went through a period of no growth to where we did not have developments, we did not have any building permits, obviously there would be certain departments that would not be part of that revenue base and expenditure base. But the city's expenditures as a whole would still increase because the economy is still increasing, the cost of goods, because we live in an economy where we don't set all those prices. We don't regulate the insurance market. All of those things we can't help it. We can give all the training in the world, but employees are still going to get sick. They're still going to get hurt. All these things out of our control that still have an impact on the budget and on actual expenditures that come through the budget. So I don't want to get like on land use on growth and should things get approved, but our budget will still grow every year. Even if we did not give pay raises, even if we did not add any new positions, it would still grow every single year.
Potentially the biggest conundrum, hopefully I said that right, my kids can have another big word, but with growth is, in my opinion, the only growth that will really truly ever, if we're looking just fiscally, the only growth that will ever pay for itself is commercial and industrial. But commercial and industrial will not come to your community unless you have residential. Fred Meyer is a great example. Great announcement yesterday to have Fred Meyer coming. But if we didn't have growth, they wouldn't. So that's that juggling act, right? So the only way to get the thing that does pay for growth is getting the thing that doesn't pay for growth.
I've heard for years, we'll count rooftops, all
Right,
the
that's not-
corporations count.
Was it like 10 years ago, didn't Costco want to come here and they couldn't come up with an agreement on utilities or something like that? And now it's 10,000 people ago or 20,000 people ago. So there's probably truth to a lot of that, like with the rooftops counting and stuff, but I don't think that's necessarily all of it, because we have to remember that Roscoe did want to come here, as far as I remember. And I'm sure somebody will email me in the morning with the actual facts, but from what I remember, they wanted to come here or some big company like that. And they couldn't come to an agreement with Boeing Utilities or something along those lines. So it has happened with lower population. And I agree about growth or about the, just all over inflation and prices going up. But some of the growth that I'm talking about is when we do have to have more police, we do have to have more fire, we do have to have more services because of the growth. So if we're trying to keep up with national standards, then we need 1,000 cops or 1 cop for every 1,000 people. So every time we increase the population, we do, if we want to keep up services, required to hire more and more, which adds to our costs. So there are some things that are just gonna organically happen, and then there's gonna be some things that are pressure from it. Now, I'm not saying, I don't think anybody's saying we just got to stop growth altogether. I don't know that that's necessarily it. But when we have subdivisions that where we're already in an area where we're struggling with certain services like water, well, whatever it is, maybe those are the ones that we take into account so that we're not putting that strain. Because they just approved a bunch of money to finish something down on the south side that had to be done for development. Like, yeah, that's kind of stuff we're talking about. So I don't know how we fix the problem, but I think it's, I think no matter what side of the issue or what side of this issue you're on, we have to look at the pros and cons of both, and that's it. But and let's see some more commercial communities.
I just want to make sure it's clear, I'm not against growth, but we have to grow smart. And when the state legislature deals with the deck like they have this past year, we've got to work around that no matter what. To supply the services for the safety and fire. And, back in, before my first term, back in, I don't know, 2010, 2015, something like that, the ratios of taxes on residential, it used to be around 65, 66 residential and a little less than a third for industrial commercial and about 2 to 3% for ag. But the ratio now is you're still in the 70s for residential taxes, and commercial industrial is way behind on that. And they're not just paying their fair share. So it's got to be a balancing act, and you got to deal with what the state gives us. We just can't go on doing what we're doing without having some solutions on what we're going to do with the residential tax. And, build more schools, taxpayers still have to pay for it because you got the bonds. And so we have to deal with it smart. So that's all I'm saying.
And I just want to point out again, I sent out an email a while ago about some state codes that might help us create some policy or answer all this question about what is training services and what isn't, and how that can help us guide these approvals better. But I haven't had any feedback on, well, I have a little bit of feedback, but not a workshop.
I got a question for you then. So I asked you this earlier before the meeting even started. What's our levy rate going to be this year? So last year it was 0.0367. And so what does it anticipate this year?
If you go to page 14, this gives you a breakdown of the last 4 years of levy rates and then the cost of on like a $350,000 value home and a $300,000 value home with the homeowner's exemption. And what the city of Caldwell property tax only would have been. They still would have county or whatever was within their area, but this is city of Caldwell only. And so fiscal year 25, I will just make a note, it would have gone down if we had not had the fire bond, but they linked the fire bond all together. They can separate it like they do on the school district. And so without the fire bond, they would have been that 3.5 mils, but it is the 3.67. And then on page 12 or 13, sorry. This kind of goes over our current property taxes, of what I have budgeted and what's kind of the valuation. So, to start off with property taxes and how it's kind of complicated. So the number one is the last 3 years of, the highest budget. So for example, if we had chose 1 year to not ask for the full levy amount, we still have the option to ask for that at any given time within the next 3 years. So the last 3 years, the 29 million, that includes $422,000. That was the change from the state tax commission, from an 80% to 90% of that revenue. Automatically we get the 3% inflationary increase. This is calculated within our budget. And then we have the new construction preliminary levy rate and the new construction value. And then we have the annexation levy rate and the annexation values. So, just to give you a caveat from like last year to this year. So this year's new construction is estimated about 1 million. Last year's was over 1.2 million. Annexation is 24,000. Last year it was 44,000. So, those numbers ebb and flow based off of what happened with those values. So then total budget, which is line 9, would be 31,323. And then, we have property tax replacement in there. And so the amount that we levy, is that second highlighted amount, which is the 31,068,000 number. And then we have the fire bond that we would also levy. So, you can see, there's the estimated levy rate, which is going to be 3.3 mils, and then our current, which is 3.6. So there is going to be a reduction in the levy rate because we are still adding value. And so the more value you add, the lower the levy rate. The lower the levy rate, the greater impact it has on new construction and annexation.
So Ray Lynn, we talk about taxpayers a lot, and so I just want to point this out. In 2022, using your schedule of $350,000 value with a $125,000 homeowner exemption, in 2022, that homeowner paid Caldwell a little over $1,300. And in 2025, they paid $827.
Yeah.
So it went down about $500 a year, even though and the reason it went down that much is the pie has been split many more times with many more people paying into the tax system.
Yes, when we added the most urban renewal, that added over $1 billion in increment or in property value, which then allowed for the reduction in the levy rate, and we did so that our property taxes were lower. I will also add that in 2022, they had they also had urban renewal. That was also a line item on their property taxes, where now they don't even have that line item unless they're in the north area. So.
That was probably a good question. Let's get back on trucks. We're not here until 4 o'clock. I'm going to be ready for next budget workshop. Did you have another follow-up?
I was just going to say, could we take like a 5-minute break?
Yeah, that'd be good. Then maybe we can come back and talk about the.
Yeah.
But let's do it. We'll take let's take 5 to 10 minutes. Okay with that, right? So, BDC.
There's a lot.
Didn't we already skip ahead and cover 2 pages already and back? So we got 2 pages covered.
I think we're back to page 9 on your packet. New position.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are gonna get started again for everyone. So appreciate the discussion so far. And so we are talking about new position requests.
So we're in page 9. These are all the new positions, and I will tell you, I was putting this together and I left one off. But as we go through this, I will add it back on there. So, you'll hear from each of the departments on these positions. These are all budgeted, within the budget on the, either the funds that I showed you or within the general fund. These are all budgeted positions. So, and then the budgeted costs include benefits, so that includes, it's fully benefited costs, it's not just the salary. The position that I left off of here is within the city attorney department. The city attorney has asked for an additional staff attorney but so that position is not, it is budgeted, it is just not included on this list. I apologize for that. But on this list, there is quite a few that are all budgeted. Most of these come from user fees or from URA. And then there are 4 general fund property tax position requests. So cemetery is asking for a part-time maintenance worker. This is at 19 hours a week. The building department is asking for a full-time building inspector / plans examiner. P&Z is asking for a code compliance officer. Economic development is asking for an economic development assistant director, who would also be the executive director of the urban renewal agency. So, fire has 3 captains and 1 EMS captain. This is to start staffing for Station 4. You'll see there's a plan within the next 3 budget years to really add staffing at the fire department to staff for Station 4 when it comes on board, so that we don't have to have an empty fire station. Golf is asking for an assistant golf professional at Fairview. And then wastewater is asking for 2 operator 3s. If you have any questions about these specific positions, I would definitely refer to the departments, because they're gonna understand the need more than.
Question.
Yes.
So, Councilor Doty, Commissioner, Commissioner Doty.
With that add on.
Put that hat on, please. I thought when we were talking about, that we discussed this in urban renewal, the economic development assistant director, I thought that was simply promoting Ophelia. Are we adding another body?
We are adding another position, so there would be 3 positions within economic development. Because there's still a need for Stephen to do what he has to do, and Ophelia's would be backfilled because we still need someone specifically downtown. But there is, between the project follow-up on urban renewal, all the new plans. If you ask Mr. Porter, he was here.
Yeah.
He attends a lot of meetings outside of urban renewal that really should be designated with staff within the city or within urban renewal. And so this position would be that person.
I'm not opposed to renewal for everything she just said, but are all of those listed in the job description?
We're
Like,
working on it. Stephen and I are working on things to show the job description.
yeah, I'd like to see the job description because we want to make sure those things you mentioned, those things that we really needed a renewal, follow up on projects, not paying until people complete what they say they're going to complete. If those aren't included in it, then I might be against this, right? Even though it's coming from a renewal. If it's really about accountability and making sure the projects are finished, going from start to finish, and everybody's hitting their goals. Because that's one thing I've noticed for sure is that once it gets going is who's really in charge. Urban renewal doesn't have anyone. So then it falls on the city employees to do to follow up on everything urban renewal decides.
Well, and then the concern I had was I believe the city was supplementing urban renewal in a payment for economic development because urban renewal was not generating enough money to pay for that position.
So, within urban renewal, yes, so there is a portion, so urban renewal without the new, or economic development without the new position is supplemented by the city by about 100,000. This position specifically, we are asking 100% to be covered by urban renewal. So we would ask for additional revenue by urban renewal. And I understand, as the treasurer, now I'm going to speak as the treasurer of urban renewal. As the urban renewal, there is fund balance until the north area and the other two site revenue allocation areas get picked up. There's fund balance enough to support this position, plus the attorney costs and the additional costs for economic development for 3 fiscal years without running out of money. So, but the hope would be that the increment, we see an additional increment in the north area pickup. And so with that, those costs would start to cover more of economic development and we would see additional. But this year, all I did was ask for urban renewal to increase 100% of that position. So.
Well, and that was my big caveat is if the city is having to supplement urban renewal for economic development now, we don't want that to continue and then we don't want to add to that as well. So you're saying financially this is covered.
That is correct.
So we would still be supplementing position 3 or 2
Yeah, so.
until
so-
renewal caught up.
Urban renewal covers all of the position costs for economic development. What it doesn't cover is the operating, so their travel and operating costs. That's what it doesn't cover, but it covers entirely the position costs.
So these numbers include benefits, right?
That is correct.
So instead of hiring 2 operator 3s, why don't we hire 1 operator 6? Never mind.
Good point. Good point.
Raylan, on the assistant golf pros, does that mean they're gonna have 2 assistant golf pros then?
Yes, and I would probably defer to Tiffany, but yes, they would have 2 assistant golf pros. So really, city staff of the golf is the superintendent, Ken, Roy, the golf pro, and then 1 assistant golf professional. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and Kendall.
So they have, and then 1 more assistant.
Yes.
Yeah, so they have 4 employees right now. And so what ends up happening is that, yes, we can hire temp employees to do a lot of the jobs, but there are some things that only city employees, because their background and credit checks, should be doing. And so, but we, during the busy times, these employees work, 60 plus hours. And then in the winter time, they're still working 40 hours. And so I think it's about creating that balance for scheduling. So, because Roy cannot be in 2 places at once and allowing that relief so people can take sick time, take vacation time, and still follow proper financial procedure from the city that we have a city employee handling cash at Fairview and being credit checked and background checked.
My only question was, what are you gonna do with 2 assistants during winter time? That's about 4 or 5 months out of the year. What do they do then?
Yeah, they would be plenty busy. They would be able to run lessons if they didn't fall singing, or they would be able to help do Fairview maintenance and all of that stuff. I think Roy could probably give a more detailed answer of what they do day to day. But I know that they're definitely still busy during the downtime, and they're even running, as long as there's no frost on the ground, there's no on the ground, they're still running grounds on. So typically it's December, January, and then maybe by then mid-February, depending on the weather, of course, they're opening up the courses again. So really the downtime's 2.5 months, give or take.
I guess, the question I would ask is, one of those assistant golf pros of the 2 more important than the equipment you really need to make the golf course great? That would be my question. Is it worth the trade-off?
Yeah, I think so, because kind of just staying off what Mary Lynn said, to have this full-time city staff that has had a proper background check. And not only that, the assistant golf pro, they require them to have some sort of certification. I don't know exactly what the levels of the pros are, but a certification in that area, and not just somebody that is, oh, I like golf. They are working towards their pro card, and really interested in, becoming kind of a career in golf. So, it would definitely boost the customer service down at Fairview, because right now we just have tons of employees that maybe just want a temp job or a part-time job or just enjoy golf, whereas having a pro down there, an assistant pro, really knowing the game can help boost morale down at Fairview.
Mr. Rayner, I have a couple of questions. So if the council decides to approve that position, it needs to be at Fairview, like this paperwork says, not all of them over at Purple Sage, making the calls from Purple Sage, and no one goes to Fairview. Because that was the argument when we gave the assistant the last time, is that somebody would be down at Fairview more. And then it didn't happen. And so now we're here asking for a position for someone to go to Fairview. And so if I remember that correctly, when we approved the last one, it was there would be someone at Fairview more often, and there wasn't. And so if it gets approved by council, that should absolutely be a requirement. So that is their duty station, for a lack of better words, and that it's not at Purple and then just when they get to Fairview, because I think that's some of the issue. Also with Parks and Rec, in a positive manner, I guess, is we often hear there aren't enough employees to keep the yards or the lawns trimmed and the equipment up to date and the playgrounds up to date. I see no request here, and I'm certainly not advocating for more government employees, but you don't need any more people to help. This is a year where you get all the lawns cut and everything's good that way.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
I will say Tiffany Parks did request the city forester position. That was in the original request as a new position. However, due to the revenues versus expenditures, it would have created parks to where they were over budget by over $300,000 over their projected revenues, which on an ongoing cost is just not sustainable. And so I worked with Tiffany to look at current personnel to see if we are able to reclass current personnel to a city forester position.
Right, was that in her presentation? Or that changed since the presentation?
So on page 10, these last couple of years, we talked about like compensation plan, and we've done a lot of reclasses. We went through I'm trying to think of the name of it, a review of all of our compensation and job classes to make sure they were realigned. What we found is that there was a lot of picking and choosing, and not everybody was assessed correctly. And we're not gonna get into any specific positions. If you have questions on specific positions, I would refer to Michelle offline. But by department, we looked at reclasses, either because they're moving from a 1 to a 2 or 2 to a 3, just in this next step position, or reclasses within our pay grade, and Michelle has done all this analysis to make sure like job descriptions match the pay grade and that they're within their pay grade as well. And so each of these departments, I just want to give you an overview. These budgeted costs also do include benefits. They're not just the salary costs. But we're trying to do something that a couple of years ago we tried to do, and it has just taken last year and this year to get it fully fixed. So.
Question. Yeah. Did we do desk audits, or how did we determine this? So my experience is you do the desk audit to see if someone needs a reclass or not, to ensure that they're doing whatever the reclass is. So this is quite a few people to do the desk audits on. So how did we decide if it was warranted a reclass?
When I first came on to the city, I met with appointed officials first and then their leadership teams.
And amongst meeting with the leadership teams and appointed officials was kind of informed of the ones that they were either already working on previously before I got here, or ones that they had identified since. And so they themselves have been doing those audits with the employees and taking their current job descriptions, going through them, updating them to be more appropriate and accurate, and then passing those on to me. So that's what we've been doing in the past, I don't know, few months, is really going through all of them. And some of them have been a little bit challenging of having to say, this doesn't justify, I need to understand.
So we have turned some down.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Raylan, the dollar amounts related to the classification, is that one person or multiple people?
Could be both. If you needed specifics on that, I would refer to Michelle and not.
So fire prevention, reclass and pay grade, $82,000. That one person or a chief, is that a department or what?
That's the entire prevention division.
Okay,
Four budget.
okay. That-
That is actually the entire information.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Thank you.
So Michelle, I have a question, or maybe Ray Lynn, I don't care who answers it. If we approve the 655,000, are these reclassifications that will happen automatically? Or are these classifications that are somewhere in the works that may or may not turn out?
That is correct. Some will happen as of the fiscal year, and some will wait until certifications are received until we move to the next step level based on what their leadership has told me that getting certifications.
So this is the worst case scenario. If everybody got their certification, everybody stepped next year, this would be.
Yes. I'll guarantee.
And I will say, this does not include, so both police and fire, well, fire doesn't have any more, but police has certain years within their steps. So like, once they hit 5 years and 10 years within their pay grade, that is also budgeted within the police department's budget, but it's not outlined here. I could give you that amount, but it is not outlined. So.
Okay, so then I got a question for Ashley, right? So I'm looking back one page, you're asking for 3 new operator 3s. So are those operator 3s new, or are they all doing this step increase?
Those, it's 2 operator 3s in their new positions.
What we do, and you will hire an operator 3 and you won't promote, or you'll promote within, some will step and some will be new?
That's a good question. So in the wastewater division, we already have had sufficient funds to budget new positions at the level 3 level so that we can, hire people who are not entry level folks. And the water division, they've had the need to restructure. And so we're trying to take that procedure a step at a time so that right now we're budgeting for a maximum of 1 promotion in the budget year. But eventually we would like to get to the point where we don't have to ask for this extra set of funds. So we're automatically budgeting at a level 3 as we do with wastewater.
So page 11, I just want to go over some sales tax and then just briefly touch on the gas tax as well. So on sales tax, to kind of explain this graph, so SFY means state fiscal year, because that's how I receive the data is based off of a state fiscal year, which is July to June, instead of our fiscal year, which is October to September. I get my updates from AIC, which is the Association of Idaho Cities, who gets it from the state. And so every year I get a budget manual from them that has updated sales tax, has the state liquor, it has quite a bit of information. And so in the original, that is for the fiscal year that I'm budgeting, that is the number that they give me. In the updated, that is the next fiscal year, so it is the one that, so for fiscal year 25, I got the original last year when I was in the budget process for fiscal year 25, and I got the updated one when budgeting for fiscal year 26. And so you can see that every year they update it based off of revised estimates from the state, and it can go up or down. And I also look at, every month, there's an economic report from the Division of Financial Management, which kind of gives an output on a state, local, or state level of what the actual sales tax collections are. In addition to that, sales tax had a revised formula that is very complicated, and it helps. It's not just one number. It's kind of complicated to figure out how to actually see what we receive. It's based off population growth. There's a lot of factors in it. Some of it goes back to 1970 and some of that calculation. So to kind of explain to it, the fiscal year actual is what we actually received. So for fiscal year 23, we received that 6.8 million. But we budgeted 7.1. So you can see there's a big difference, and the original and updated are much different because those are on a state fiscal year instead of our fiscal year. For 2025, you can kind of see the original last year was 6.7. The updated amount that they give me is just 7 million. We've only received 3.4 million to date. That's only 2 payments, 2 quarters, and I budgeted 6.4. There is a little bit of an increase that's budgeted, but I looked at kind of the trend because of DFM, and I really thought the state estimates for sales tax were quite high. I also talked to Justin, who's the new employee in the city attorney's office, who's worked with policy and sales tax and looking at just trends for quite a while, and wanted to get his take on it too. And so he gave me, between 8 and 10% of a reduction from the state. He's always thought that the state has over budgeted, and it's not been accurate. And so I feel like the number that I'm budgeting, that 6.6 million, is pretty accurate for sales tax. Now that percentage is split between multiple funds. It doesn't all go into the general fund, but I just wanted to kind of show you how difficult it is sometimes to figure out what numbers are being budgeted and where the number should be or shouldn't be. So with gas tax, I also get that from AIC as well. And so this year, you can see that we're budgeting that 5.6 million. That number could change a little bit, but I haven't seen where there's been a significant decrease in the gas tax. We've seen an increase year over year. So I do feel that 5.6 million is a valid number for the budget. Any questions? All right. So then I know there's a lot of questions the first budget workshop on like what percentage was property tax, sales tax, and fees. And so I just put this together that kind of shows the revenue totals by fund and what is property tax, sales tax, and fees. Fees is everything that is not property tax or sales tax. So I wanted to give you this for this information. These numbers still could change, but this is kind of the split on how things are split up amongst the city by fund. So you can see general fund does receive most of about 50% sales or property tax, 6% sales tax, and 43% is fees. Those fees come from either internal allocations or building fees. There's a franchise fees. There's a lot of different fees. So, so if you have any questions on that, please let me know. But that's kind of, I just wanted to give you that for your information. So, to kind of show the breakdown. And then this last page is a property tax comparison by city. And it kind of shows that services by city are not the same. How cities allocate general, how they allocate police and fire, who has special districts, who doesn't. This was from 2025, and this just got pulled from budget books, so I didn't do like public records requests or anything like that. But it kind of just shows you the difference between like, you know, what City of Boise does, what City of Meridian does, City of Nampa does, as well as like how we allocated for fiscal year 25. And then, you know, Meridian doesn't have a library within their city funds. They have a separate library district, which means like it does impact their levies and their property taxpayers. Same with they have a separate fire district. So I just wanted to give you this information just to kind of show you how each city is different and just comparing total levy to total levy or total property tax allocated is not a 1-for-1 comparison based off services. So that is all I have to present tonight for you guys.
Q&A, I know we went through a lot of that already, but is there additional Q&A with time or?
Question?
Yeah.
I want to do this here. I'm just getting up. Raylan, is there or will there be some place where we could go at our leisure and look at all numbers and all budgets and
If you would
take
like,
the time and look at it?
I can give you online access to OpenGov. I can give you that link with a login and you can log in and view all the budgets as a view only. I was not able to create the book like I did last year. Like I said, with being just me, it takes a lot of time to do that, but
Yeah, and I remember last year the book became irrelevant pretty early in the process.
yeah. But I'd be happy to give you OpenGov access and, you'd be able to view all of the budgets if you wanted to. If that's something that you would like to do.
Will I be overwhelmed if I look at that?
There are a lot of proposals in there and there's a lot of things.
Okay. Will there be a point where we have a city?
Yes, so that will probably come out, in the middle of July. Before the public hearing, yeah, middle of July.
Any other?
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is unfair. That's what I do, is I got a question. So look on the council agenda and I look at these little cover sheets and I see that the police is buying something as approved in the budget.
Yeah.
And wastewater is buying something as approved in the budget. Then I go back to my book and I go, yeah. Are we just approving categories of things like equipment, or are we approving things like new pumps, motors? How would we go back and say, yes, this is it, but how it's not?
So within the OpenGov proposals, there is a place to put detail. Sometimes some departments put more detail than others. But we have it split out by line item, so general categories of expense codes. So if it's repair and maintenance of pumps and motors, or so with operating expenses, those are very general categories, but kind of like travel and meeting or office supplies, very general. We're not going to say out exactly what we're buying. We just have an approved budget. For capital expenditures, there's always a capital project or specific item. So if there is, you know, within the capital fund, we lay out what exactly we're purchasing. It's not just a general thing. With all of the wastewater, water capital projects, all of those are specified within the budget for specific projects. Personnel is allocated by personnel, so we don't over budget with those. It's even very detailed on the selection of what type of health insurance they have, if they have it. So
Just following up, just so I understand. So Mr. McDonald really needs a new car. He's driving an old junky city car. Hey.
They'll get one in the lease program.
But if I saw him request a new car and it says on the thing within budget, how does he know that? Where is he looking?
He should be putting it in his proposal because that is a capital purchase, and so it should be detailed out.
And we can see the same thing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to export all of the capital projects so you can see all of those if you would like in an Excel spreadsheet and email them to you.
I don't know what I want with that.
But there's quite a lot of those too. I mean, yeah, when I go into the budget, some people get overwhelmed because you think about every department has a proposal, every capital project has a different, so proposal is a specific line, like, detail of a drill down amount with a financial category too. So, you know, there's a lot of work that gets involved to put in a system to have that detail. It's not just an Excel spreadsheet with the dollar. I know I categorize it but that level of detail can get very overwhelming very quickly.
Like I plans for years out as well. So now when you're looking not just at next year, but am I going to need that new vehicle in 5 years? So it's very detailed out for that amount of time as well. Okay, anything else? Okay, very good. Then that wraps us up for tonight, and then we'll see everybody back here tomorrow night.
Before we adjourn, I just, there's a couple of things I think that tomorrow is definitely about departments, but then next week on Thursday, if we could really, I know that there's a lot of questions storming over, with police and fire, if there's a specific recommendation that they're looking for, or would like to see if it's the fee increase or status quo for right now until we have an additional, maybe the solution is leave it as is and then have a workshop in January, with some other items, to discuss and see what further information we can bring about. If it is removing that balancing of police and fire and just rolling them all the way up in general fund, if that's something, I would really like some guidance on that to figure out. So not tomorrow, but Thursday after, which is our final budget workshop, if you could follow up on that. Also, with property tax, the budget is set around taking the 3%, but if that's something that is not part of what you want to do, that would be the time to bring it up as well, as part of the discussion, to let me know so we can adjust budgets as that, as well. So, just a couple, and then the property tax relief is and the building fund, those two things as well. Because those are not set in stone, but I would like to be able to budget for them if that's the council decision to move forward with that. So
One more curveball story to throw you at this, and then tomorrow as well, it'd be good to talk about West Valley names. So you should have got that email from Oscar. He goes through his analysis and basically kind of details out those options. So if you haven't read it yet, please read that. Something I know. But you didn't? I didn't give those options. So I don't think he called out on, just said that this is kind of what's required and these are some of the other things. So we can talk about those options. We can just kind of, I think we laid out what is required and not required. So again, just review that, and then I'd love to have some discussion tomorrow about which direction you'd like to go.
I can tell you which direction I'll go right now, or unless you want to wait until tomorrow.
Let's wait till.
I got the answer to that one.